The forest held its breath in the hour before dawn. Mary Callahan's boots crunched through fresh snow, each step deliberate in the pre-dawn darkness. At 26, she had learned to move through these woods like a ghost. 4 years of self-imposed exile had taught her what grief and guilt never could. Solitude was safer than connection, isolation more bearable than loss. Her breath misted in the freezing air as she checked the trail cameras she'd placed along the northern boundary. The illegal traps had been creeping closer to her cabin for weeks. Everyone in Timber Ridge knew it. No one did anything about it. The poachers had grown bold, and the authorities either couldn't or wouldn't stop them. Mary pulled the memory card from the camera mounted on the old pine. Her father had taught her to monitor these woods, back when he was alive, back when she still believed one person could make a difference. The thought brought the familiar ache to her chest, the weight that never quite lifted. He'd been a conservationist, a man who spoke for the wolves when no one else would. Then came the accident 4 years ago. A fall, they'd said, inspecting equipment near the ridge. His body had been found at the bottom of the ravine, broken beyond saving. She'd been the one who asked him to investigate the poaching reports that week. The guilt was a living thing, coiled around her ribs, tightening with every breath. A sound cut through the silence. Not the crack of a branch or the whisper of wind through pines. Something else. Something wrong. Mary's pulse quickened as she moved toward it, her hand instinctively reaching for the knife at her belt. The forest had swallowed whatever gunshots might have preceded this moment, but the aftermath was unmistakable. The clearing opened before her like a wound in the woods. The white wolf pup lay in the center, small and impossibly vulnerable. Maybe 4 months old. The steel jaws of a trap had clamped just above his right front paw, and his pale fur was matted with blood that looked black against the snow. His blue-gray eyes found hers, wide with a terror that made Mary's throat close. Around him, the snow was churned and trampled. Adult wolves had been here recently, probably fleeing when they'd heard her approach. She could see where they'd circled, where they'd tried and failed to free him. Before we continue, I've noticed that many of you enjoy watching my videos but haven't subscribed yet. Please help support and grow this channel by liking the video, dropping a comment, and subscribing if you enjoy the stories. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to the story. Now, somewhere in those dark trees, they were still out there, watching, waiting, deciding if she was predator or salvation. Mary had survived 4 years alone by avoiding exactly this kind of choice. The kind that demanded action instead of retreat. The kind that asked her to care again, to risk again, to step back into the world of consequences and connection she'd abandoned after her father's death. She had 3 options, each one crystallizing in her mind with brutal clarity. Leave him to die slowly. Walk away. Pretend she'd never seen those pleading eyes. Let nature take its course, as brutal and final as it always was. End his suffering quickly. The knife at her belt was sharp. It would be merciful. One quick motion, and the pup would be free from pain. The pack would understand. Predators understood death. Or do the one thing every person in Timber Ridge would call suicide. Free him, carry him home, and pray that somewhere in the darkness, his family would recognize mercy instead of threat. The pup whimpered, a sound so soft it barely carried across the frozen air. His leg trembled from pain and exhaustion. How long had he been here? Hours? Through the entire night? Mary's wolf stirred uneasily beneath her skin. Not literally. She wasn't a shifter from some fantasy, but something deeper. An instinct. A recognition. She'd always felt connected to these woods, to the creatures that called them home. Her father used to say she had the gift, the ability to understand what the forest was saying when others only heard noise. What would he do? She knew the answer. Had always known it. Mary Callahan knelt in the blood-stained snow, her hands already reaching for the trap's release mechanism, and made her choice. The same choice her father would have made. The choice that honored courage over fear, compassion over safety. Behind her, in the deep shadows between the pines, golden eyes watched. The pack had not left. They'd been waiting to see what kind of human she was. Now they would know. The forest had tested Mary Callahan before, but never like this. Never with stakes that could cost her everything or finally give her something worth living for. The trap's release mechanism was slick with blood. Mary's fingers trembled as she worked the lever, hyper-aware of the pup's teeth inches from her exposed hands. One panic snap and she'd lose fingers to infection. Maybe worse. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Wounded animals don't know friend from foe. They only know pain. But the white wolf didn't bite. He remained eerily still, watching her with those unsettling blue-gray eyes. As if he understood. As if some ancient knowing passed between them in the frozen silence. When the steel jaws finally opened with a rust shriek that made Mary's teeth ache, the pup whimpered, but didn't struggle. His mangled paw came free, and Mary saw the extent of the damage. Deep lacerations. Possible bone fracture. The kind of injury that would kill him slowly if infection set in. She stripped off her thermal jacket and wrapped him carefully, ignoring the cold that bit through her flannel shirt. The pup weighed maybe 20 pounds, all fur and fragile bones and trembling heartbeat against her chest. When she straightened and turned toward home, she felt them. Not saw. Felt. The pack, moving parallel through the trees, shadows flowing between the pines like smoke. Golden eyes catching the pre-dawn light. They made no sound. Gave no warning. Just followed, patient and implacable, as Mary carried their youngest 2 miles through snow that grew deeper with each step. Her cabin appeared through the trees like salvation. Small, rough-hewn, heated by a wood stove that barely kept the worst of winter at bay. Mary shouldered through the door and laid the pup on the table she'd cleared of everything but her father's old medical kit. He'd treated animals as often as people, had taught her the basics before she'd learned to read. Clean the wound. Check for debris. Stop the bleeding. Her hands moved through the motions while her mind screamed that this was madness, that she was going to watch another creature die despite her best efforts, that caring was the fastest path to breaking. The wound was worse than she'd thought. Deep enough to see bone. She flushed it with clean water, applied the antibiotic ointment sparingly, because supplies were running low, wrapped the paw in gauze she'd boiled last week. The pup endured it all with that same unnatural calm, those intelligent eyes never leaving her face. By the time she finished, dawn had broken, gray light filtering through windows that rattled with wind. Mary sagged into her chair, exhaustion pulling at her bones. The pup would likely die anyway. Infection would set in. Fever would take him. She'd wake tomorrow to a small, cold body and the knowledge that she'd failed again. Movement outside the window made her breath catch. The white wolf was massive, her fur pristine even in winter's harshness. She stood motionless in the clearing, her gaze locked on Mary through the frosted glass. This was Sarah. Had to be. The mother. The alpha. Close enough that Mary could see the intelligence burning in those golden eyes, the calculation, the decision being weighed. Mary's hand instinctively went to the rifle mounted above the door. Instead, she found herself standing, moving to the window, meeting that ancient stare. Her voice came out hoarse from disuse and something deeper. I'm trying to save him. The words hung in the cold air between them. Truth offered across an impossible divide. Sarah didn't attack, didn't bare teeth or raise hackles. She simply watched for another eternal moment, then turned and melted back into the forest like she'd never been there at all. Mary exhaled, realized she'd been holding her breath. Behind her, the pup made a small sound, something between whimper and sigh, and she understood with sudden, terrifying clarity that everything had changed. The pack knew where she lived. They knew she had their pup. And they were waiting to see what happened next. The fever came on the second night. Mary woke to whimpering, found the pup trembling violently on the nest of blankets she'd made by the wood stove. His nose was hot and dry, his breathing rapid and shallow. Infection. Despite everything she'd done, the wound had turned angry and red, swollen tight against the gauze. She worked through the night, changing dressings, coaxing water down his throat with an eyedropper, applying cool compresses to bring the fever down. Her father's medical kit was nearly depleted. No antibiotics strong enough for this. Just hope and stubbornness, and the desperate prayer that sometimes, rarely, the body won fighting. By the third day, Mary couldn't remember the last time she'd slept more than 20 minutes at a stretch. The cabin had narrowed to a single point of focus, keeping the pup alive. She fed him by hand, tiny pieces of venison mixed with broth, and discovered something strange. When she hummed, his breathing steadied. When she sang the old folk songs her father used to croon while working, songs about mountains and rivers and the wild places that endured, the pup's eyes would find hers and hold. As if the melody meant something. As if he recognized comfort in the sound of her voice. "You're gonna make it," she whispered on the third night, though she didn't believe it. "You hear me? You're too stubborn to quit now." The pup licked her palm, a gesture so gentle it made her throat tight. Dawn on the fourth morning arrived gray and cold. Mary dragged herself from the chair where she dozed, every muscle screaming protest. She looked down at the pup and her heart stuttered. His eyes were clear, alert. The fever had broken. His tail gave a single, tentative wag. "Oh, thank God," she breathed, and the relief nearly buckled her knees. She stumbled to the window to let in light and froze. Tracks circled the cabin in overlapping rings, pressed deep into fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Wolf tracks. Dozens of them. The pack had been here, moving soundlessly around her walls while she fought to save their pup. Standing guard, watching over them both. Mary's hands shook as she pulled on her boots and coat. She needed firewood, needed air, needed to prove to herself that the world beyond these walls still existed. The cold hit her like a fist when she stepped outside, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were locked on the porch. A rabbit lay there, still warm, its neck cleanly broken. Fresh kill, placed with deliberate care on the wooden planks. Not torn apart, not half-eaten, whole and intact. An offering. Mary sank to her knees in the snow, staring at it. They knew. The pack understood what she'd done, what she was doing. This wasn't just animal instinct or territorial calculation. This was gratitude, recognition, communication across a divide that shouldn't be possible. That night, after she'd cooked the rabbit and shared pieces with the pup she'd started calling Leo, after she'd watched him eat with something like appetite, after she'd cleaned his wound and found it healing pink and clean, Mary sat by the wood stove and felt something crack open in her chest. The tears came without warning. For years of holding everything in, of refusing to feel because feeling led to breaking, and suddenly she couldn't stop. She cried for her father, for the loneliness, for the fear she'd carried like armor. She cried because a pack of wolves had shown her more grace than any human in Timber Ridge. Because something impossible was happening in this cabin, and for the first time since her father died, she wasn't alone. Leo crawled into her lap, careful of his injured paw, and rested his head against her chest. Outside, in the darkness, the wolves called to each other. Not howls of warning. Something else. Something that sounded like home. Leo healed with a speed that defied everything Mary knew about injuries. Within a week, he was putting weight on the paw. Within 2, he was moving through the cabin with only the slightest hitch in his gait, a small imperfection that would mark him for life, but wouldn't slow him down. He grew stronger each day, filling out, his white coat thickening against the cold. And he never left her side. He followed her from room to room, a silent shadow with eyes that tracked her every movement. When she split firewood, he lay in the snow watching. When she cooked, he sat by the stove, head tilted as if memorizing the process. At night, he slept by the fire, but if she shifted in her sleep, his ears would swivel toward her, always alert, always aware. Mary found herself talking to him. At first, just practical things. Need to check your bandage. Hold still. But gradually, the words became confessions. Truths she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself they weren't real. I killed him, you know, she said one night, her voice barely above a whisper. Leo's blue-gray eyes never wavered from her face. My father. I asked him to investigate the poaching reports. I knew it was dangerous. He knew it was dangerous. But I asked anyway, because I was 22 and righteous and so sure we could make a difference. Her hands stilled on the wood she was carving, a habit from childhood. They said it was an accident. Everyone believed it. But I knew better. I just couldn't prove it. Leo moved closer, pressed his head against her knee. I don't know how to live without the blame, she continued, surprised by the relief of speaking it aloud. It's the only thing that makes sense. If it's my fault, then his death means something. If it's just random, just bad luck, then what's the point of any of it? The pup made a sound, low and gentle, and Mary realized she was crying again. Softer this time. Not the breaking open of before, but something closer to release. The howls came on the 20th day, echoing down from the northern ridge. A chorus, complex and layered, calling across the miles. Leo's head snapped up, his entire body going rigid. Mary felt it like a physical thing, the pull between them. Family calling. Home waiting. It's time, isn't it? She asked, though she already knew the answer. She walked with him to the forest edge, where snow gave way to pine shadows and the wild places began. Her heart was breaking, but it was a clean break, not the festering wound she'd carried for 4 years. This was different. This was right. Mary knelt in the snow, cupped Leo's face in her hands, and memorized every detail. The slight scar above his right eye. The way his fur caught the morning light. The intelligence burning in those impossible eyes. Go home, Leo, she whispered. Back to your family. And thank you. Her voice cracked. Thank you for letting me help. For trusting me. For reminding me what that feels like. Leo licked her face once, a gesture of such tenderness that Mary had to close her eyes against fresh tears. When she opened them, he was already moving, a white shape flowing between the trees, limping slightly but strong, alive, free. She watched until he disappeared completely, swallowed by the forest that had given him to her and now taken him back. The wind carried distant howls, joyous and welcoming, and Mary stood alone in the clearing, telling herself what she needed to believe. She would never see him again. This chapter was closed. Life would return to what it was before, solitary, manageable, safe. She told herself this, and almost believed it, as she walked back to her empty cabin with wolf tracks fading in the snow behind her. Spring came slowly to the mountains, ice yielding to mud, snow melting into streams that ran cold and clear through the forest. Mary worked her small garden plot, coaxing seeds into the rocky soil, trying to remember how to think about futures instead of pasts. 6 months had passed since Leo disappeared into the trees. 6 months of silence. She told herself she was grateful for it. She was kneeling among the early lettuce when she noticed the boot print. Fresh. Less than a day old. Right at her property line, where the cleared land met forest. Mary's pulse kicked up as she stood, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. But someone had been there, watching, and whoever it was hadn't cared about leaving evidence. The trail camera confirmed it. She'd mounted it on the old oak to monitor deer migration, but when she checked the SD card that evening, she found something else entirely. The footage had been tampered with, hours of recording simply gone. Someone had accessed it, deleted what they didn't want seen. The kind of someone who knew what they were doing. Then came the drone. She spotted it 3 days later, a dark speck against the spring sky, hovering over her cabin for a full minute before banking away toward town. Not a hobbyist toy. Professional grade. Expensive. Mary's hands shook as she made coffee that night, trying to convince herself there was an innocent explanation. Surveyors. Wildlife researchers. Anything but what her gut was screaming. The knock came just after dawn. Ranger Tom Brennan stood on her porch, his face drawn tight with something between concern and fear. He was one of the few good ones left in the department, one of the few her father had trusted. "Can't stay long," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "But you need to know. That name you asked me to look into years ago, after your father." He swallowed hard. "Garrett Voss. He's real, Mary. Runs the entire black market operation in 3 counties. And his name's come up in connection with your dad's death. Wasn't an accident. It was a hit." The words landed like blows. Mary gripped the doorframe. "You're sure? There's more." Tom's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "His men have been asking around town. About a woman living alone out here. About a white wolf someone freed from their trap last winter. They're looking for you, Mary. And they're not the kind to ask politely." He left before she could respond, his truck kicking up dust as it disappeared down the access road. Mary stood frozen, her mind racing. The white wolf. Leo. They wanted him back, wanted revenge for their lost prize, and she was the witness who could identify them. That night, she came home to devastation. Her cabin had been torn apart, books thrown from shelves, furniture overturned. Her father's research notes scattered like snow. They'd searched methodically, looking for something or sending a message. Probably both. The note was pinned to her door with a hunting knife, the blade driven deep into the wood. The paper fluttered in the evening breeze, and Mary's blood turned to ice as she read the words scrawled in black marker. "You took something valuable. We're taking it back. And you." No signature. No date, just a promise written in certainty and threat. Mary's hand went to the rifle mounted inside the door, her father's rifle, kept loaded for emergencies. She scanned the darkening forest, seeing threats in every shadow. How long did she have? Hours? Days? Would they come at night, when she was sleeping? Or in daylight? Bold and unconcerned about witnesses? She was alone. Miles from town. No cell service. And somewhere out there, men who'd killed her father were coming to finish what they'd started 4 years ago. Mary loaded the rifle with trembling hands and settled into wait, wondering if saving one white wolf pup would be the last good thing she ever did. The sound of engines woke her just after midnight. Mary came alert instantly, adrenaline flooding her system, the rifle already in her hands before her conscious mind caught up. 3 sets of headlights cut through the darkness, converging on her cabin from different angles. Tactical. Coordinated. No warning, no negotiation. She moved to the window, staying low. 3 trucks, all equipped with roof racks and heavy-duty suspension. Men poured out, maybe 8 or 9 total, each one carrying weapons that caught the moonlight. Not hunting rifles. Military-grade hardware. And at the center of it all, illuminated by headlights, stood a man Mary recognized from her father's old notes. Garrett Voss. Tall, confident, moving with the ease of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "Mary Callahan," his voice carried across the clearing. "We can do this easy or hard. Your choice." Her hand shook as she dragged her father's old desk against the door, then the bookshelf, building a barricade she knew wouldn't hold for long. She grabbed her satellite phone, the emergency beacon her father had insisted she keep. The Rangers were 40 minutes away on a good day. In the dark, through mountain roads, it would be over an hour. She pressed the button anyway. Sent the SOS. Knew with sick certainty that help wouldn't arrive in time. "You freed something that belonged to us," Garrett continued, his men fanning out around the cabin, thermal scopes raised. "Cost us $250,000, that white wolf. We're here to collect." The wolf, and the witness who can identify us. He paused. Make this easy, Mary. Open the door. She raised the rifle, sighted through the window, her finger on the trigger. One shot. She could take one of them, maybe two if she was lucky. Then they'd burn her out or storm the cabin, and it would be over. This was how she died. Alone. Just like her father. Then, from the darkness beyond the headlights, a howl split the night. Not one voice. A dozen. 2 dozen. An entire chorus rising from the forest like a summoning, like a war cry, like judgment itself. The men froze, their weapons swinging toward the tree line. Mary's breath caught in her throat. The white wolves emerged from the shadows like ghosts made flesh. Silent. Coordinated. Dozens of them, their eyes reflecting the headlights in shimmering gold and silver. And at the front, leading them, was a wolf Mary would have recognized anywhere. Leo. He was massive now, nearly grown, his white coat gleaming like fresh snow under the moon. The limp was still there, slight but visible, a mark of what he'd survived. And beside him, matching him stride for stride, was Sarah, the alpha, the mother. Her presence radiated authority that made the armed men step backward despite themselves. What the hell? One of Garrett's men breathed. The pack moved with terrifying precision, spreading out in a wide arc, flanking the trucks, cutting off escape routes with the efficiency of predators who'd hunted together for generations. They didn't charge, didn't snarl or snap. They simply positioned themselves, a living barricade that turned Garrett's siege into his own trap. Leo's eyes found Mary through the window, held her gaze, and in that moment she understood. He remembered. He'd come back. Not alone, but with his family, with his pack, with every wolf whose territory these men had violated. This wasn't an attack. This was something far more deliberate. This was a siege of their own. The first gunshot shattered the standoff. One of Garrett's men panicked, fired at the nearest wolf, and the night exploded into chaos. The pack moved like liquid shadow, scattering and regrouping in patterns that defied comprehension. They were too fast, too coordinated, flowing between the trucks and the trees with predatory grace. A wolf would appear, draw fire, then vanish before the shooter could track them. Another would materialize from a different angle, driving the men toward each other, herding them like prey. Mary watched through the window, her rifle raised, as Leo broke from the pack in a white blur. A man had taken position near the cabin's corner, his scope trained on her window, finger tightening on the trigger. Leo hit him like a freight train, jaws closing on the man's arm, dragging him down into the snow. The rifle discharged into the air, useless. Sarah led a group of 5 wolves toward the trucks, moving with lethal precision. They went for the tires first, fangs tearing through rubber in explosive bursts. One truck lurched sideways as its front axle collapsed. Men scrambled to reach the vehicles, but the wolves cut them off, not killing but disabling, strategic and ruthless. Mary kicked open the door, her barricade forgotten, adrenaline burning through her fear like wildfire. The third truck was trying to reverse, to escape, its engine roaring. She raised her father's rifle, steadied her breathing the way he taught her, and fired. The rear tire exploded, then the front. The truck slewed sideways and died. Burn them out. Garrett's voice cut through the chaos, raw with rage and desperation. Mary saw the Molotov cocktail too late. Glass shattered against the cabin's wall, and flame roared to life, consuming the dry wood with terrifying speed. Smoke poured through the broken window, acrid and choking. She stumbled backward, eyes streaming, lungs burning, trapped between fire and armed men. Then something crashed through the smoke, white and massive and impossibly fast. Leo's jaws closed on her jacket, dragging her toward the door with a strength that would have terrified her if she'd had room for anything beyond blind survival. They burst into the clearing together, Mary coughing and gasping, Leo's body pressed against hers like a shield. The cabin was an inferno now, flames reaching toward the sky like accusing fingers. The fire was visible for miles, a beacon in the mountain darkness. Mary collapsed in the snow 20 yards away, watching 4 years of solitary life burn to ash, and felt nothing but gratitude to be breathing. Around her, the battle reached its conclusion. Garrett's men were down or fleeing, abandoned weapons scattered in the snow. The wolves had them surrounded, not attacking now but containing, golden eyes watchful and patient. Sarah stood over one man who'd tried to crawl away, her presence alone enough to keep him frozen. Garrett himself was on his knees, blood streaming from a gash on his leg where a wolf had hamstrung him. His face was twisted with pain and disbelief, staring at the creatures who dismantled his operation with terrifying efficiency. Sirens cut through the night, red and blue lights flashing through the trees. The rangers, the state police, drawn by the fire that painted the sky orange. They arrived to find a scene from a nightmare, armed poachers surrounded by wolves, a cabin burning, and Mary Callahan sitting in the snow with a white wolf's head resting in her lap. She looked down at Leo, at the intelligence burning in those blue-gray eyes, and felt tears track through the soot on her face. "We're alive," she whispered, her voice raw from smoke. "We're both alive." Leo's tail moved once, gentle against the snow, and Mary finally let herself believe it. The evidence was damning. Garrett Voss's phone alone contained 5 years of transactions, shipment records, contact lists that reached into state government and federal agencies. Exotic pelts sold for hundreds of thousands. Bribes paid in cryptocurrency. And buried in encrypted messages, the order that had killed Mary's father. The conservationist is a problem. Make it look like an accident. The gorge by the river. Mary sat in the ranger station's conference room, giving her testimony for the 3rd time, watching federal agents piece together a criminal network that spanned 3 states. They'd found everything. The syndicate, the corrupted officials who'd looked the other way, the hunters who'd done the actual killing, including the man who'd pushed James Callahan off that ridge 4 years ago. "We'll need you to testify," the lead agent said gently. "At trial. Are you prepared for that?" Mary thought about her father, about Leo, about the pack that had defended her when no one else would. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." The arrests came in waves. Local officials, state wildlife officers, hunters and middlemen and buyers who'd thought themselves untouchable. The case exploded across national news. Woman saved by wolf pack she rescued. The headlines made it sound like a fairy tale, something too impossible to be real. Reporters camped outside the motel where Mary was staying, cameras tracking her every movement. "How does it feel to be a hero?" they asked. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who'd stumbled into the right choice at the right moment, who'd been saved as much as she'd saved. But the world needed its stories, its clean narratives of good triumphing over evil. So she smiled for the cameras and said what they needed to hear. 3 weeks after the siege, Mary drove to the cemetery on the edge of Timber Ridge. She hadn't been here since the funeral, couldn't bear the thought of facing what she'd lost. But something had changed. The weight she'd carried, the blame that had defined her, felt different now. Still there, but no longer crushing. Her father's headstone was simple: James Callahan, conservationist. 1965 to 2021, he spoke for those who could not speak. Mary knelt in the grass, traced the letters with her fingers, and finally said the words she'd been holding for 4 years. "I finished what you started, Dad." Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. "They're going to protect the wolves now. New legislation. Protected status for the white pack. Funding for enforcement." She smiled through tears. "All because of you. Because you cared enough to fight, even when it cost you everything." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and spring flowers. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called. Mary closed her eyes and let herself remember her father not as a victim, but as he'd been: passionate, stubborn, brave. A man who'd believed one person could make a difference. "It wasn't your fault," she whispered. "And it wasn't mine. They killed you because you were effective, because you mattered." She pressed her palm flat against the stone. "I'm going to keep mattering too. I promise." The weight didn't disappear. Grief never truly left. But it shifted, transformed into something she could carry without it carrying her. Purpose instead of guilt. Legacy instead of loss. Mary stood, squared her shoulders, and walked back to her truck. Leo was waiting in the forest beyond the cemetery, she knew. The pack had been shadowing her since the siege, silent guardians making sure she stayed safe. She wasn't alone anymore. Hadn't been alone since the moment she'd freed a white wolf pup from a trap and chosen compassion over fear. Her father would have been proud. The new cabin rose from the ashes of the old one, timber and stone built to last, with wide windows that let the forest Indiana. Mary stood on the porch 1 year after the siege, coffee steaming in her hands, watching dawn break over the Northern Wolf Preserve. Her preserve now. Official title: Wildlife Liaison. Unofficial role: bridge between two worlds that had been at war for too long. The sign at the trailhead read James Callahan Memorial Preserve in letters carved deep into oak. Visitors came weekly now, sometimes daily, hiking the marked trails, attending the educational programs Mary led in the outdoor amphitheater her team had built. She told them the story they'd come to hear, the one that had made headlines across the country. The white wolf pup, the trap, the choice she'd made in the snow. It wasn't heroic, she always said, meeting their eager eyes. It was just right. And that's all any of us can do. Make the right choice when it's in front of us, regardless of cost. Leo visited often. He was magnificent now, fully grown, a young alpha with his mother's intelligence and his own quiet authority. The limp was barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it, a small imperfection that only made him more real. He'd bring members of his pack sometimes, letting them observe from the tree line as Mary worked, teaching them that not all humans were threats. The white wolves had become symbols. Resilience. Coexistence. Proof that what seemed impossible could happen if enough people chose courage over convenience. State legislation had passed. Federal protections were pending. The pack that had nearly been exterminated now had sanctuary, legal standing, a future. On the anniversary of Leo's rescue, Mary hiked to the ridge where she'd released him 1.5 years ago. The trail was familiar now, worn smooth by her boots, but the significance never dulled. This was where she'd said goodbye, where she believed she'd never see him again, where she'd been so catastrophically, beautifully wrong. The pack was waiting. She saw them before she crested the ridge, white shapes against green forest, gold eyes watching her approach. Leo stood at the front, his tail moving in slow recognition. Around him, the pack sat in a loose circle, patient and calm. And at the center, regal and impossibly powerful, was Sarah. The white alpha had never let Mary touch her, had watched from distance, assessed, approved, but maintained the boundaries that separated wild from tame. Mary had accepted this. Some gaps weren't meant to be bridged completely. But today, on this anniversary, Sarah moved forward. Mary froze, barely breathing, as the massive wolf approached with deliberate steps. Sarah's eyes held hers, gold meeting human brown, and Mary saw the recognition there, the understanding, the acknowledgement of what had passed between them, what had been built from a single act of mercy. Sarah stopped inches away, lowered her head, and allowed Mary's hand to rest on her fur. The texture was coarser than Leo's, weathered by years of survival, warm with life and strength. Mary's fingers trembled as she touched the legendary alpha, feeling the heartbeat beneath white fur, the breath that moved through powerful lungs. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in Mary's understanding of the world. She wasn't alone. She never had been. The forest was alive with connections she'd only begun to understand. The wolves, her father's legacy, the visitors who came seeking hope, the rangers who now protected what had once been vulnerable, they were all part of the same circle. The same story. The same impossible, necessary truth. That compassion could forge bonds stronger than fear. That mercy could be answered with loyalty. That one choice, made in blood and snow and terror, could ripple outward into something larger than she'd ever imagined. Mary knelt in the grass, surrounded by wolves, and finally understood what home meant. Not a place, not safety, but belonging to something bigger than herself, being part of a circle that would continue long after she was gone. She was home. She always had been. The forest had just been waiting for her to realize it. If you enjoyed this story and want more like it, please like the video, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly means the world to me and helps this channel grow. Thank you for being here.